now I'm joined by Nathan Ikon Crumpton, who just wrote a new book. But before we get to that, obviously we want to know what's going on with your athletic career, an Olympian, of course. But you mentioned that you are retiring.
I am, yes. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be back here in the studios. And yes, after 11 years of skeleton racing, over a decade, sliding down ice chutes at 80 plus miles an hour, I decided to retire. I made it to the finals of the Winter Olympics back in February in Beijing. And I decided that's going to be pretty hard to beat. And so I thought it was time just to hang up the spikes and move on to some new pursuits.
Well, congratulations on all you've achieved during, more than a decade of doing the sport. And now you're challenging yourself with a book.
I am, yes.
Tell us about it.
That is the latest. So I have written a book. It is called Alpha Status, a nonfiction novel. And this has been in the works for about 4 years. I started it after the Pyeongchang Olympic Games and decided to write. It's not a short book by any means. But if I had to describe it, I would say it's like a contemporary version of The Wolf of Wall Street. So it actually has nothing to do with my sporting and athletic career. It's much more of a wild Wall Street pursuit.
So it's not based on any real instances or situations or people?
It may or may not be. I will have to admit that certain parts of it are inspired by actual friends of mine who ended up going to work on Wall Street after college. And I saw how money changed them. I saw how that culture of Wall Street really changed them. And it turned them into these people who were almost pathologically obsessed with the pursuit of money and women and status. And I thought it was just so wild and so otherworldly that I could make a book out of it. And so I did. And so I created this really long book right here. It's about 550 pages. It took me a while to write, but it was...
Yeah, how long did it take you? I was going to ask you about that.
Sure. So it took me about 3 years to write, 3 off seasons, I should say. So in the winter times, I would be racing skeleton, but then in the off seasons, I had time to focus on the book. And so 3 off seasons, was able to write it, and then another year to edit it and to get it all designed and then get it to market. So it is available now on Amazon.com, both as the paperback, which you see here, and as the Kindle. And hopefully I can generate some sales during this holiday season to make up some of that money that I invested in skeleton racing, which is not a cheap sport.
Yeah, you mentioned that was kind of one of the reasons also that you decided to retire, because of the price and the cost of it. I mean, putting that much of your own money into something you love, though, I'm sure it's kind of sad for you to say goodbye to that part of your career or your life.
It is, absolutely, especially when you invest so much time, so much energy, and yes, so much money into it. Overall, for that Olympic season, it cost about $45,000, almost $50,000.
Wow!
To
and how much do you
for
actually
make
Games. From that career?
It varies entirely depending on how well you do, but it's usually about a break-even affair. And it took me probably 5 years just to get to that stage, just so that I had enough sponsors, just so that I had enough income to pay for all of the costs. But it's certainly not a cheap endeavor. We don't make the money that the NBA players do, that the NFL players do, and that's why we have the side gigs to do, whether it's writing or photography or anything else.
Well, luckily you have the talent to be writing a book, so that's the fallback. If anyone had a fallback career, being a writer would be great. So
I hope so, and I hope this launches another career in writing. I love the written word, and I love crafting a story, and hopefully this works out well enough that I can afford to write a second one in the future. Yeah,
well, and tell our viewers, because they might not be aware of your connection to Hawaii, why are you here, and where are you based now, like that whole story.
Sure. So I'm actually on my way back from American Samoa. So I represent American Samoa in these Olympic sports, so most recently in skeleton racing at the Winter Olympics. And my ties here to Hawaii actually go back to my maternal grandmother. So she was born here on Hawaii, raised in Honolulu. She went to Roosevelt High School, and we've got plenty of extended family that are still here on the islands as well. So have to give a shout out to them, to the Toms, to the Kaulukukuis. So it's great to be here and great to be in familiar territory in what is essentially a second home for me. I was actually born in Kenya and I grew up overseas. And so always coming back to the islands and being here, it does feel a little bit like being at home.
But you're not based here anymore. Where do you go now?
No, so I do have some moves in my life. I will be heading out to Germany later this month. So I recently accepted a job over there, and I unfortunately don't speak that much German. So that's going to be that's going to
so
be
cool,
part of the
though.
challenge, though.
What city?
So I'll be in Munich.
Yeah.
A lot of fun there.
So you've been there several times already?
I have, yes.
Okay.
And because of skeleton racing, it's mostly a European sport. So
okay.
most of the races were in Europe. And so over the last decade or so, I ended up going back and forth to Europe a lot. And then during the pandemic, I ended up moving to Europe just because that's where the races were. That's where the prize money was. And so I've got a little bit of a life started over there. And now I'm making it formal and getting a job and officially becoming a European resident.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I wish you the best of luck also in your writing career. Definitely check out the book if you're doing some holiday shopping. And Nathan, congrats again on everything that you've achieved so far. Looking forward to hearing what's next for you. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.